So today, we're talking about the migration from Ivanti Endpoint Manager to the cloud-based Neurons, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is an incredibly common topic we have with our customers today, and so we just want to get everyone together, get you fed, get you educated on what this looks like. Obviously today is just trying to kind of talk about the generalities. We'd love to talk to you more individually on a one-on-one if you have very specific questions. Most customers do, so that's totally normal. But people kept coming to us and saying, hey, we've got this great product, Endpoint Manager. It's gone through a lot of different name changes, but currently it's Endpoint Manager, and we're going to talk about that in a little bit as well. When is it going to be in the cloud? When is my EPM going to be in the cloud, right? And that's the topic of conversation today. And the short answer is, it's not like we just take that exact same product and have it up in the cloud, but let's take those features and migrate to the cloud. We want to extend to give cloud-based functionality, because you know what? There's some stuff that we're just not quite ready for in the cloud. You'll hear us kind of talk about things like imaging. Imaging is just not something that lends itself well to be an internet-based service. Copying a 50 gig image file across the internet is just not as practical as doing it on premise. So there are reasons to say, well, I don't know if I'm ready for the cloud.
Yeah.
And we've got this new great product, Neurons for DEX, but I don't know if I'm ready. And so a lot of customers are in that kind of problem. They've gone, and a lot of organizations are saying, well, we're cloud first now. We want to move up to the cloud. Well, sure, things like email, that was a piece of cake to get up in the cloud. Other kind of collaboration tools like service management and so forth, again, easy to go in the cloud. They're just web pages. But Endpoint Manager is not one that really lends itself really easily to move up to the cloud. So we want to talk about how we are going to extend it into the cloud, keep some of that same functionality on premise, but then add on the Neurons, which is all of our cloud products, the Neurons for DEX to it as an extension. So we've got this migration where I get both. And we'll talk about that in a little bit, but that's kind of the premise of today's conversation.
Yeah, but I do want to reiterate that. It's very important that the path for migration isn't 100% migration on day one. Mm-hmm. You are allowed to run both the on-premise product as you are making that transition to the cloud, which allows you to keep those features that might be a little bit better suited for on-premise still. And you mentioned the imaging, and that really is the big one. I mean, I think a year ago when this was available, you still had some concerns that maybe there wasn't feature parity.
Yeah.
But a lot of those have been addressed, and now not only are we recommending it, but we are moving forward with a lot of our customers.
Yeah.
One of the reasons we picked this topic today is because we've had a dozen or so customers already make this move, and a lot of others that are in the process.
Yep, absolutely. And that really is kind of the key. Is it's very topical right now. Lots of people are asking about it, and as you come up to your next renewal, I think it's something all customers should investigate and say, hey, is now the right time? So that's what we're going to do today, is arm you with the ammunition of the data points, the talking points, some of the value points associated with it, and then you can make the decision if it makes sense for your organization.
And I know next you're going to go into some of the naming, explain how people make that transition and what EPM means to them. There's different names for it.
Yep.
But the important thing to keep in mind is there is a migration path. Even whether you have an enterprise license agreement and you have Endpoint Manager through that ELA,
right.
There still is a path to get you credit for what you own today and allow you to run both simultaneously. So we can discuss that with everybody individually after if there's some interest in it, but I just want you to keep in the back of the mind, everybody who's running Endpoint Manager today has a path to make this migration.
We had a customer that was 2 months after their renewal. It made sense to them, and they just got credit for what they've already paid. So you're not going to lose anything, so really it doesn't matter when it happens. But yeah, the first topic I want to talk about is a problem with the naming. And it is an issue, so I want to kind of address it kind of head on. We kind of have a little funny thing around the office here, and we've got instead of a swear jar, I've got the old product jar here. And so it's got money in here. I make people pay every single time they use some of the old names of the products. And the reason is because we have a lot of transition and products that change names as they got brought into the Ivanti ecosystem and so forth. Some of them have changed a couple of times over the years, and so they might get a little bit confusing on what that looks like. And so I want to start with a conversation around, what are the names of the products and what were the legacy names, what do they transition to and so forth, because on all the quotes and so forth and documentation, they reference all the new names, but a lot of customers know them by the old name, so there's just some confusion there. So That's what I want to start out with is a little bit of the name game, and then we'll kind of go from there.
That's mostly my money.
That's mostly Dave's money, and he's going to probably have to put more into
a
it
couple
today.
dollars before we're done
everyone
today,
else
too.
keep track. Now, I'm exempt from this when I'm going through the naming conversation, where I will go broke because I'm going to use a lot of the old names. But after that, pay attention and put it in chat if Dave uses an old name. We're going to pay for it.
I don't know if I have cash today, but I'm good for it.
I don't know
see.
about that. We'll see. But everyone else, as we go along, if you have questions, just please put them in the chat there, and Dave can see that and can read it off, and we'll kind of go from there. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So let's run over here to the whiteboard and again review what the name game is. And we're going to talk about the old product name, and then we're going to talk about the new product name. And I'm going to draw them in different colors so we can kind of understand a little bit more better about that. So let's start with what most likely brings us all here today. And that's what I know as the new product. I'm going to do black as the new product, and we'll do red as the old product. Endpoint Manager, or you'll hear us call it EPM. Well, that had a lot of previous names in the ecosystem, beforehand. You might hear the word Landesk. Landesk was the name of the company, 2007, 17, so we're 6 years into this. We shouldn't be using the old company name. But that was the name of the company. The product's actually called Landesk Management Suite. So LDMS, you'd hear us refer to it as sometimes. And then for a brief time there, we actually had a product inside of there called UEM, Unified Endpoint Manager. That's really confusing because we actually do have a UEM product now. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but that can get very confusing. So all of these products, they essentially are the same thing. They are just called Endpoint Manager now. So trying to remember what that's what that is. The other big product that we're always talking about, it's not topic of today's conversation, but part of the ecosystem and so forth, is our Neurons for ITSM. So Neurons for ITSM. What the word neurons is it is a generic brand name. It isn't actually a product itself. And it almost always indicates cloud-based. So when you hear the word neurons, just think, oh, that's most likely a cloud-based technology. And it's neurons for something, and the something is the product. So neurons for ITSM, neurons for DEX, neurons for UEM, neurons for discovery, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The old names of those products, you might have heard it, this came from the company called Heat. So you might have called it Heat or Heat Service Management or something like that. We would call it internally a lot ISM for Ivanti Service Manager. Service Manager was the name of the product. But again, those have all been renamed to Neurons for ITSM. And then we had ITAM. It doesn't really have a huge new name. That's just called Neurons for ITAM. There was a couple of, I'm writing it wrong. I'm writing challenge today, apparently. Neurons for ITAM. There was a couple of other products in there, like our, the one that was actually in the Landesk family that was Asset Central. It's not the same product. In this example, I'm not talking about migrations to different products, simply the exact same product that I've always had with a different name. So I wouldn't categorize the Asset Central as part of that. And then I screwed up. That should be in black. I have to put some money in the swear jar over there next time. Okay, next let's talk about our Neurons for DEX. Neurons for DEX is what we're going to get into today, and it had several other names. Most notably was something called Ivanti Cloud. And originally there was kind of a very generically named version of this product, and it was renamed. It was actually included in a lot of entitlements for ELAs. So if you actually have an ELA, very likely that it was included in that. That means you're actually entitled to the Neurons for DEX. Now, kind of a sub-component of that is not technically a new name. There are several other components that are included inside of DEX, but it's just a product grouping, meaning we didn't technically rename the products called Neurons for Discovery, Neurons for, what are the other ones? Workspace. We also have the Neurons Platform, and we have Neurons for Healing. Those are not renamed Healing. We simply created a bundle for them and called it Neurons for DEX. So that's why I wrote it in black. It's not a new name. It's simply a bundling of products. A lot of customers are like, well, why do I have to buy these individually? You still can buy them individually, but we grouped it up kind of nicely together. And then lastly, MDM. And the real name is, just like we were talking about before, Neurons for MDM, right? And it came from Mobile Iron. Mobile Iron was the name of the company that Ivanti purchased a couple of years ago as part of that, or it may also just have been called MDM in there. So both of those are now the neurons for MDM. So that's our name game. Again, try and recognize those new names and use them when you're speaking about the product, just because using the old names they're getting older and older, especially like the Landis name. I mean, we're 6 years on, we got to kind of move on with life associated with that. Okay. Let's move on. Let's talk a little bit more about the migration. Again, the idea behind this is I like Endpoint Manager. It's got some cool features. I've been using it for a while. I want to know more about this cloud stuff, but I don't want to give up necessarily my Endpoint Manager. What can I do about that? So let's jump over here and talk a little bit more about that. So we specifically have migration SKUs that let us have our cake and eat it too, right? I get to be able to have both of those. So that's the biggest component of what we're talking about today. And the idea behind it is we had a lot of customers that said, okay, well, which way should I go? Should I, keep my Endpoint Manager? Should I go to the cloud? What is the correct answer for me? Well, the great part about these migration SKUs is it gives me the ability to do both. I believe most of the customers on the phone here today are existing Endpoint Manager customers. If you don't Endpoint Manager, you don't really care about the migration, right? You're probably just going to go buy the neurons for DEX, but it gives us the ability to take what we have already, take that investment that we've already made in the product. A lot of our customers don't see it as a huge increase in cost, in order to add these migrations. But if you went and bought it brand new, that'd be a different story. It might be a lot more expensive. So we see it as very advantageous. I don't think we've actually run into a customer yet that we've showed them the migration SKUs and what the cost would be, and they said, "Oh, wow, that's way too expensive, or we're never be able to afford it." Pretty much every customer is like, "Oh yeah, no, that's good," and they start getting it in their budget cycles and so forth. So we've got a lot of happy customers on this migration. Notice that you see down there at the bottom, we've got a couple of different scenarios. So we've got to talk about that. And this is where we're saying, well, we've got the EPM to UEM or the EPM to DEX. What does that mean? What is the difference between those, and which one should I be picking? Well, that's a really good question. But first, let's say why should I move to the cloud? What is the reasonings behind it? You can see really reducing the overhead. A lot of our customers saw Endpoint Manager as a great tool, but you know what? It just had a lot of upkeep. I've got to upgrade the database. I've got to upgrade the agents. I've got to do all of this work. I'm trying to come up with a little bit of an analogy for that. Think of it a little bit like an airplane maintenance versus car maintenance. There's a rule for airplanes, I don't know exactly what it is. For every 500 hours you're in the air, you've got to spend, 25 hours on the ground doing maintenance on that particular craft, right? So you might feel like there's a lot of, overhead, the total cost of ownership or the amount of investment I have to make into it, continues on quite a bit. Well, whenever you're using a cloud service, it feels a lot more like a car. Well, sure, I've got to do a little bit of maintenance. Every once in a while, I've got to change the oil. But, I can drive thousands and thousands of hours without necessarily having to do huge amounts of maintenance. So reducing that overhead in the cloud is great. Being able to consolidate into, a single platform, reducing how much time we have to actually invest in it. And then you can see there's sometimes reasons you should not migrate. If you are, SaaS is not a strategic part of your conversation, then maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense. There are some customers that do that. I've got some customers that are, secret or top secret networks. I mean, obviously those are very, very cloud adverse organizations, but we found that I bet 95% of customers see it as a potential viable option to move forward. But here's the real question we have to pose to you about why should I be choosing neurons for DEX or neurons for UEM? We have both of those migration paths at our disposal. So why should I pick one over the other? Well, it's a pretty straightforward question. You can see it on the screen right here, right now. Do I need MDM? So we define MDM as the components that, like we talked about, that former Mobile Iron set of organizations. Me personally, this is my personal opinion, not the opinion of NCSI or Ivanti or anything like that. I find that it really boils down to iOS and Android. If iOS and Android are part of the conversation, most likely the answer is yes, we need MDM. If iOS and Android are not part of your management conversation, the answer is most likely no. The reason being is you can manage a Windows 10 or a Windows 11 device through MDM, but it just doesn't feel as good. There's not as much functionality as we feel like on iOS and Android. And so a lot of my customers say, well, I just don't need that. Other than wiping a machine, that's probably the biggest thing that you can do inside of MDM. But outside of that, we can do everything else, because things like MDM don't actually do patching Well, we still got to do patching in a different ecosystem. Why don't we just do that for all of our management? So do I need MDM? The answer is yes. Which one's yes over here? I buy Neurons for UEM migration. The answer is no. I do the Neurons for DEX migration. So kind of what it looks like is this. Currently, I run Endpoint Manager, and then during the migration, I get Endpoint Manager and Neurons for DEX. I get both of them, or Neurons for UM, whichever one, doesn't matter. And I get to use both. And then one day in the future, I don't care if that's a year from now, or maybe it's 5 years from now, maybe it's 10 years from now. Ivanti has not put a limitation on that. I can stay in the migration, and then I can go to the post-migration, the after-migration, where I only have Neurons for DEX. But there's not a huge cost savings, so I'm kind of telling most customers, hey, ride both ponies for now. It's okay. You can have both. There's no additional financial incentive to drop Endpoint Manager. But then in the future, when you think you're not getting enough value out of it, then you'll then stop using it. However, there's one consideration you got to always bring into the conversation, and that's the fact that patch is always considered a separate component. When you start looking at these migration SKUs, just because it says I'm getting Neurons for DEX or Neurons for UEM migration, patch management is not included in that SKU. We have to add that as an additional line item. However, that's almost certainly in your existing renewal today. Most of our customers that use Endpoint Manager patch, so it's not a huge cost difference again. We just are, when we're looking at the quotes, you're going to see that patch is not part of the migration bundle. We simply add it in there as an additional line item. Some of the other differences between Endpoint Manager and our Neurons for MDM, you can see some of them kind of listed out here. Differences between on-premise and cloud. The scalability in Neurons for UEM is just monstrous. You want 100,000 devices in there, that's not a problem. You could do it. The scalability is, practically infinite. You can see things like the infrastructure and planning on disaster recovery and some of the security things. You just don't have to deal with that. It is taken care of for you by the Ivanti operations time. And then what my customers really come back and say is, oh, do I have to upgrade again? I've got to go through all the process. I've got to upgrade agents. Ivanti takes care of that for you. It's a continuous process. It is always the latest version, and our agents even upgrade automatically. So very easy to manage in kind of the no ecosystem. As you can see here, a little tiny bit of an eye chart, but we're talking about features here. So that you can make the determination, okay, should I be moving to Neurons for UEM or Neurons for MDM? Well, as you can kind of see it here, these are the different features and functionality. Probably the two things I want to call out, though, is number one, software distribution. We had this conversation 6 months ago or so, and software distribution was in beta, or it was a no. Well, now that's released and it's out and available. So, software distribution is now a yes, we can do it in the Neurons for DEX and Neurons for UEM. But again, notice imaging. Imaging is not in anything except for that on-premise technology. So if imaging is a big driver of what you're doing, we need to have a conversation about it. Again, the migration SKU makes it so I can have both. I don't have to worry that I'm going to be losing that. You're not going to lose it. But this just gives us a feature comparison of what's out there. We don't do everything exactly the same way. Like when we get into remote control, we do it a little bit different, a little bit potentially easier. So it's not always inside each feature a perfect like-for-like representation, but they're pretty darn close. So that's a comparison of our versions and so forth. All right, I'd like to actually show you a little bit more about what it looks like in action, so you can kind of see some of the components that we talked about. So I'm going to give you just a super brief run through of our Neurons for DEX components. Now,
hey, Bryan,
please.
Before you jump into that, we did have a question.
Yeah, lay it on me.
It's actually a pretty good question. With Neurons for MDM, does that include patching for iOS and Android, or is that a separate SKU?
It does not include patching for iOS for Android because we cannot do patching for iOS and Android for the most part. The patching of those devices is a giant mess. The short answer is that they are consumer devices. Consumer devices we don't have complete control over, including what operating system they're using. So we can understand what version they're using. We can make rules that say if they're not using a version that we want to kick them off or send them a message or something like that. And in very specific use cases, like iOS has this mode called supervision. If you got an iPad that sits at your front office as a office greeter or something like that, it's like a single application. You're disabling the button to actually open. That's supervised mode. We can actually upgrade those devices. But most people are thinking, no, I'm thinking about just Bob's iPhone at his house. No, usually that's not even under our control, or even if it is owned by the organization, you're most likely not going to put it in supervision mode. So the short answer is we don't have great options for upgrading operating systems, or by that extension, patching operating systems in MDM. We have a little bit, but it's not fully fleshed out. And that's really just a limitation of the API of the manufacturers. That's just Apple and Google putting some of those restrictions on, not necessarily limitations on our side. Great question, though. Keep them coming as we're going through this. Now, normally I'd spend an hour plus on this next part of the conversation, but I know we don't have that much time. I don't want to bore you with it. So I'm just going to give some of the quick highlights, and you can, if you like what you see and you want to have either a more in-depth demo, I can send you a recorded video of this, or I can give you just one-on-one kind of conversation. So a lot of times we struggled with real-time information inside of Endpoint Manager. We always just thought, you know what? 2-day-old inventory is just going to be good enough, right? Well, that's just not great in this day and age. What about things like people working from home? When the original Endpoint Manager was first created, the concept of work for home was just fantastical at that point, right? The original product was designed in the late 80s. So the idea of people working from home just wasn't a thing. So we had to bolt on things like the Cloud Services Appliance in order to change its original design to match what the new future kind of looked like. Well, this product is born and bred from the cloud on up. We don't have to deal with things like that. You don't have to deal with a lot of infrastructure, like the Cloud Services Appliance and other kinds of things. This real-time information, I love this map. I could start zooming in here and get down to, if the device actually has a GPS chip in it, down to street level at that point. I lost it. It's up here. So I can get very, very specific information. I can get real-time information. If I click on this device, it's actually, watch, it's going to take a second. It's polling that device right now for that information, and then it returns the results. Sure, it took, 4 or 5 seconds to render that, but this is real-time. I can see CPU and memory of what's going on right now. What's its internet latency? What's its uptime? Oh yeah, your problem is you haven't rebooted in a while. If I click on this device dashboard, I can get a much more in-depth version of this same view, except it's going to bring a lot more data to the conversation. So it takes a little bit longer to go and bring back and render this. You're going to see things like this, the digital experience score. What on earth is DEX? We've said it 20 times now, and we never actually explained what that means. Well, we've got this thing called digital experience. It's kind of a new attitude, as it were, to look at how our users are experiencing their daily life. If you've ever heard any of my conversations before, you've probably heard me say things like, well, we lost a war with our end users. We didn't even know the war was happening. And suddenly, one day, they showed up and they thought they knew more than us. I think, my personal opinion, the consumerization of technology is the biggest driver. The iPhone and Android devices, I think, drove this. Think about 20 years ago. If my mother wanted a piece of software, think about what that process was. Driving down to the store, deciding what the software is based on what the box is, putting in the CD, installing it. I mean, there was a big setup. Now, well, I've got an app store. I want any software at any moment, I can just, bam, I can hit it. So the world changed around us, and our users, they are not necessarily the happiest. They think we're the Department of No. They think we're led by the CI No. And that's not necessarily our fault, but the world did change. So we need to flip our script a little bit. We need to start saying, I care what the user feels. And that really is what the digital experience is. How many blue screens have they had lately? What is their internet latency? How many tickets have they opened? Think about it for a second. You've got a user working from home, and they have a crummy internet connection. Their internet latency is really high. Are they going to sit back and say, well, the problem has to do with the fact that they're using a 5 gigahertz band, and the saturation of that and the penetration power through walls is a lot lower on 5 gigahertz versus 2.4 gigahertz? Are they going to say that? Or are they going to say, yeah, those jerks in IT make my computer run slow? I'll give you a hint. It's going to be the latter one. So we need to start interacting with our users in a different way. So that's what the digital experience score is. Right here you can see we try and summarize all of that information that I was talking about. blue screens and latency and tickets and issues with their computer and errors into a single number. You can see it right there. I've got a 75 on this one. 75 is fine. That's kind of, above average. If I get a ticket for this user that has this particular device, I'm going to say, oh no, if they're complaining about problems and issues, well, they might just be a little bit of a complainer. Versus if I open this up and it was a 25, I would say, wow, your machine is tanking. There's something fundamentally wrong with it. We've got to go fix that. So that really is what the digital experience score is, and we represent it right there. I can see other things, their performance and CPU and memory. I can go down here and actually take a look at what processes are running or what services they have on their particular machine. Oh, I got a phone call from the user and they are having latency problems or performance problems, or they can't print. Oh, your print spooler's not started. Let me go down here and start that for you. That's the reasoning why that's happening. So I can kind of get a little bit more insight into that particular machine. I could understand more about what's going on with it. This is one of my favorite things right here ever. Did you see what I just did there? I went in and pressed ipconfig. I ran a troubleshooting command on a remote machine that might be on the other side of the world from me and might have a user logged into it that's using it actively. And what do you know? I ran ipconfig. Oh, your DNS suffix is wrong. Oh, let me go test real quick. I need to ping to see if your machine can talk to my server. Let me go fire that off really quick. Oh yeah, there we go, 12 milliseconds of latency. Super cool ways to troubleshoot our devices, or even go in and take a look at things like, oh, maybe your problem is you're having issues with logon performance, or oh no, it was very good, you logged in 15 to 30 seconds. Well, maybe the issue has to do with you haven't rebooted in a while. Well, I'm going to do a device uptime query. Oh yeah, look at that, 12 days worth of device uptime. Yeah, maybe you just haven't rebooted your machine. So I'm kind of interrogating the machine in real time. We did not have this kind of technology before an Endpoint Manager. It was just so historical information instead of anything kind of up to date. As we keep going down here, we get into the DEX score and we can understand more about those individual components. Okay, what's the status of their antivirus, disk encryption, application errors, all of these things are going to add up and tell me what the sentiment of that particular user is. But that's interesting. Now that we've said, well, why does one machine have a problem or is having login issues and things like that? I'm looking at one device. What about the rest of the world? What about the rest of my devices? Well, great, we can do that kind of thing. So let's go back to our Edge Intelligence here. And this is where I can start to ask the system questions. Anyone that knows Endpoint Manager knows about queries. Well, queries are a little cryptic. They use a little bit of SQL language. You've got to know the fields. It's sometimes a little bit of a struggle. What if I go and type up here and say something like logon performance? I am simply using natural language, asking a question. And do you see how it's rendering? That's because it's actually querying those devices right now, and it's getting the most up-to-date information that we have associated with it. So sure enough, look, in my machines, I've got some that are having terrible logon performance. Let's go take a look at that. What's going on with that? Hey, this machine right here is having extremely long problem. That one's at 12 hours. That's probably a broken machine that we have in there. But if I go and take a look at this particular section information, why did it take 1 minute and 19 seconds to go and log into this machine? Well, I could tell you. Here's a Gantt chart. Oh yeah, look at that. We were stuck at Explorer initialization for 1 minute and 14 seconds. The fact that we were applying some applications and so forth, no, OneDrive only took 0.56 seconds. It must be something else. Or, hey, who are our local admins? I can understand what local administrators we have out there and which ones are, unexpected. So these particular machines should not necessarily be in the local admins group. Look, we can actually take action against them. I've got an ability to remove it from local admins. If you don't know what questions to ask, that's okay. Look, I've got all these questions in here kind of pre-populated for you. Oh, tell me about things like BitLocker. What's the status of BitLocker in our organization? Some of them are just going to be informational, that they tell me what the status is. But other ones like BitLocker, we can actually go do something. Look, I can take action over here on the side. I've got an enable BitLocker function, or if I hit manage, I can open up and create my own. Oh, let's go create a quick action. I want to turn this on or turn this off or execute this command or restart the machine or different things. So I can very easily have actions be taken against that.
So Bryan, you actually partially answered, I think, a question that we had. Does Neurons collect BitLocker keys?
Oh, hey, good question. So the concept behind that is we have the ability to do, first of all, let's do disk encryption. The reason I say disk encryption is because this platform is supported on both PC and Mac. And on Mac, we don't have BitLocker, we have FileVault. It's kind of just a different mechanism for doing it. But in this example, we can see PC and Mac over the top. We do not escrow keys. That is one function that is different. Endpoint Manager will escrow those keys. Our Neurons for DEX will not escrow those keys. So when I go and enable this BitLocker, in my example, it's just simply turning it on. We can do more complicated things, like if we opened up Manage here and we went and created a more complicated quick action that would like run a PowerShell script, and that PowerShell script could take the key and report it back to us. We could make a more complicated version that would do that, but no, not out of the box. We do not automatically escrow the BitLocker keys like we do over in Endpoint Manager.
Can you create custom data inventory items like in EPM?
Can you create custom data inventory items like EPM? No, you cannot create it directly, meaning that we have information, and we have a lot more information than we had before, and all of these items that you see here are gathering a lot more data than Endpoint Manager ever did. We do gather traditional Endpoint Manager inventory information, though. So if we go and take a look at one of my machines here, if we look at the inventory information, you're going to find it to be almost exactly the same as you saw in Endpoint Manager. The reason being is we didn't go and reinvent the inventory engine. We just ported the inventory engine up into the cloud. So like if you look in here, a good example of that is probably this section right here, modem. We wouldn't have had modem in a brand new cloud technology, right? But we piggybacked on that. So custom data, even though there is a custom data section right here, will not come across. However, we can do things different ways. And I'm going to talk about that kind of next, how just because we don't gather custom data, that's not a fundamental problem. We've got options at our disposal for that. But good question. Let's kind of segue over to that. So I want to do something with this data, or I need to gather some data, or you've got some cool queries here, but they're not good enough. I want something else. I need X. Well, we've got these things called bots. And what bots are is part of the Neurons for Healing package. And this is one of my favorite parts of the tool. When we get into other components like remote control, that's not exciting. We've been doing remote control for 25 years. You see their screen, you can click on their buttons. So we've got it, it's there, but I don't think that's exciting. Bots are something brand spanking new. They did not exist in Endpoint Manager, and they are a new and different way to manage our machines. And I really want customers to dig into this more because I think there's a lot of value in there. I can go and create a bot to do lots of different stuff, to gather information, to take action on that information that was gathered. Really, the sky's the limit. If I go and open up and say, let's go create a custom action here, we can go and say, well, what do I want to find out? I want to ask the system a question. Well, look at all these queries I've got. I can query for .NET frameworks, battery health, BIOS information, BitLocker data, device smart, disk encryption, DNS lookups, GPO changes, et cetera, et cetera. We got a whole pile of things that we can go and ask a question on. Then we take action on that question and do something about it. This is really what's exciting. Going from querying to taking action against those queries. I have actionable intelligence now. Let's force them to reboot. Let's create a folder. Let's add a printer. Let's display a notification. Let's send an email. Let's open a ticket. Let's isolate from the network. Let's, set a certain process a certain way. Turn on a firewall, et cetera, et cetera. And then we've got these customs down here in the bottom, PowerShell query and PowerShell action. These are the answer to the custom inventory information question that you just came up with, because I can drag out a PowerShell query and then I can put whatever I want in a PowerShell query and we would go gather it over here. If you're not using ChatGPT or something like that to write your PowerShell scripts, you are missing out. If you're anything like me, you're not a scripter. You couldn't program anything worth anything, and so it's intimidating. I go to ChatGPT and I say, please write me a PowerShell script to do the following, and bam, it spits it right out. So for sure, lean into that. It's very helpful for you to write some of these a little bit more complicated ones. So again, we've got a bunch of queries automatically. Look at all these ones. I mean, it's like 67 of them. So you probably don't have to always write them, but if you have something specific, you do PowerShell. And then we also have Bash for Macs. Same kind of concept. You can write a script to do something more specific. But the idea would be here, let's look for a piece of data and let's take action against it. So like, for example, over here, Smart Hard Drive Health is one of my favorites. Smart Health is built into almost every hard drive that's been built in the past, 20 plus years? And it says, hey, you've got this many bad sectors, you're in a predictive failure state, things like that. I talk with a lot of customers, and you know what? Almost every single one of them doesn't monitor that status. They've got too much stuff going on, their hair's on fire, they don't have time to do proactive things. Bots are very proactive, but they can do the heavy lifting for you. So here would be an example of that. I want to come down here and I want to add a filter in here because I don't care about machines that are working. Think about for a second what you would, what the normal model of replacing a laptop would be. So what would happen? I've got a laptop, it's got a hard drive in it, and it's starting to fail. So it's starting to slow down, I'm getting some weird issues, maybe I got a blue screen here and there, eventually it crashes 100%, I pick up the phone, I call the help desk, hey, I need a new laptop, it's not working, you got to ship it out to me. There's a huge number of steps there. Everyone is having pain during that interaction. Well, what if we could do something more proactively? What if we monitor that hard drive health? And I would go and say here, I'm going to look at the property called health or model or something like that, and I want to say that it not equals to healthy. If we ever come back and say the status is not healthy, that is a problem. Well, what would we want to do in that particular case? Well, if we scroll down in here, you can see I can create a ticket. So I'm going to go create a ticket for that user automatically, and this is just the credentials that I'm going to go and connect to. So now what's happening is I have the ability to say, a ticket's going to show up in our queue, and we're going to pick up the phone and proactively call that user and say, hey user, we see your hard drive's failing, let's get that replaced before it actually fails. I mean, they'd fall out of their chair. That's not something IT has been doing. We've been such reactionary mode. I want to turn us into be more proactive. What about that Wi-Fi example? We said someone's at their house and they have terrible Wi-Fi. Why don't we check that? We go over here on the left-hand side. We've got a couple different ways. HTTP ping is my favorite way to do this because I'm seeing a connection for HTTP. Let's go to google.com. And I want to know if it's greater than 900 milliseconds of latency. If it is greater than 900 milliseconds of latency, they're having a horrible day and they're blaming IT for it. They're not blaming their Wi-Fi saturation in their building or whatever. So why don't we come down here and we actually display a message to the user. We can actually talk to our users. Let's display a message and let's tell them, hey, it's your Wi-Fi sucks. You need to go do something about that. So lots of different options here. Again, query for something and then do something about it. And we've got some really cool examples in here around things like interacting with teams. We've got a really cool one about like disk space that says, hey, let's reach out to the user via Teams. We've got a Teams bots integration as part of this. Hey, we found out your hard drive is full. Would you like us to clean up the disk space or do you want to do it? If they say no, we stamp their registry and say don't bug them again and we kind of leave them alone. If they say yes, we start cleaning their hard drive. We might get to the point where we're like, oh, we found out that your downloads directory is what's using up all your space. Do you want us to clean it up or do you want to? Again, we're interacting with the user in this manner. So you can really start to see some cool stuff come out of these bots. I'm very excited to see what the future looks like around here. All right, last couple of things I want to show you before we try and wrap up, and that's the idea that we have software distribution. So again, this is not something that was in our tool even the last time we potentially talked to you about this, but now we have it. Very easy to create our packages. You just come in here and we have that same kind of logic where we say, oh, well, download the file, then execute it, then do a reboot, or oh, you got to run a PowerShell script as part of it. And so we have all these different actions that we take as part of pushing out software. So it doesn't have to be just a simple, oh, exe and that's it. No, we got lots of things, MSIs and executing other kinds of things. As part of our spend intelligence, we've got lots of great insight into what's going on with all of my software. How many applications do I have that are end of life and I didn't know about? Oh, did you know that right here, Adobe Acrobat version 11 went end of life in 2017? Well, you've got 6 computers that are running it. You need to worry about that. So a lot of times Endpoint Manager customers always felt like it was a great tool, but it never told me what to do. I had to bring insight into it. Well, in this example, it's telling me, hey, you should go pay attention to these end-of-life software that you have. Or under our smart advisors, we've got things like reimage or replace. Take a look at a bunch of stuff like what's the warranty look like? How much RAM does it have? Can it be upgraded in Windows 11? All those different things. We recommend you replace these machines because they don't have a warranty. They may not be ready for Windows 11, but you know what? These 712, no, you just need to wipe those boxes and get a new version of OS on it. The hardware's fundamentally fine. So some great smart advisors. We've got a bunch of other ones in there, but you can see we've got some great proactive things for that as well. And then last but certainly not least, patching. This is something that Endpoint Manager does very, very well, but I had a lot of customers say, you know what, this was a very common problem. We had turnover, that's pretty normal. We had, someone in charge of our EPM and they left. I need NCSI to come in and teach me how to do patching. I used to actually conduct 5-day training training sets on for customers on Endpoint Manager. We'd spend a whole day on nothing but patching. This is so much easier. It's so much easier to use. So I can just go in here and say, patch our corporate laptops. I go in here to the bottom to say, what do I want? Critical, important, and moderate, whatever. I can choose individual patches, like, oh yeah, this version of, .NET or PuTTY I want on these machines, but most customers don't do that. They're just like, nah, it's a workstation. Let's just do critical, important, and moderate. And then down here in the bottom, you say how it's going to reboot, and then when am I going to do it? Oh, let's do it based on Patch Tuesday. Let's wait 5 days after Patch Tuesday and then roll it out to all my devices. And you can see we can also do it for Mac as well. Just go turn that on. So very easy to do our patching, way easier than we did it over in Endpoint Manager in the past. So that was a super ultra fast run through. Like I said, if we've sparked enough interest, just hit up your NCSI salesperson. Let's have a more detailed discussion. We didn't even get into things like our connectors, where we can talk to other tools, import data from Intune and SCCM and Google Workspace and Jamf and ServiceNow, Tenable, Rapid7, et cetera. We've got a whole bunch of connectors and other things that are part of the equation. So,
and we did share the link to our YouTube page. Stay there for a minute, Brian, because we did have a couple of questions.
Okay.
As a follow-up to the BitLocker question,
yeah.
Can you specify the encryption algorithm?
You can, because when you come in here and take a look, let's go back to that Edge Intelligence really quick, and let's open up and say disk encryption. Let's get back to where you saw I was telling a machine to turn on BitLocker. Well, how did I do that? Where did this come from? It came from me going in here and creating a script to say execute a PowerShell command, and it's right there. So I would simply, again, go to ChatGPT or Google, and say enable BitLocker via PowerShell. So I would just go and find a PowerShell script, and whatever command that they specify on there for bit depth or whatever you specify when you're turning on, you would just put it there in that action that you have there. So the argument is, yes, you can specify whatever you want because you're creating that action for it to do it. You're not bound by anything that we couldn't just run in a PowerShell script.
Okay.
Good question.
And we actually had two that were very related.
Yeah.
First one is Endpoint Manager does BIOS updating as part of patching for HP devices. Is that something we can do in Neurons? And the related question...
Let me answer that one first, or I'll forget it for sure.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to it, is actually the answer that I'm going to come up with. I need to do some research on that. So we've got our patch configurations right here. We could potentially figure that out because we've got our vendors right here. If we expand out vendors here and scroll down to HP or Hewlett-Packard, and it looks like we've got some HP system management stuff, but I don't see BIOS updates jumping out at me. So let me go track that down, and we can just send it as a follow-up to you to see if we can actually do BIOS updates and so forth. At first glance, I don't see that, but it actually is the same patching engine and the same patching database. So for argument's sake, we should be able to, because it's the same thing just ported up into the cloud. So I'll find out the answer to that.
So the related question was, can BIOS firmware updates be done via bots? BIOS/firmware.
I think it's the same bucket.
Yeah.
I don't know if we have those built in automatically as part of the content packages, meaning if I can get it as a PowerShell script or some kind of executable, you could have rolled it out as part of the software distribution that you saw. What is a BIOS or firmware update other than download a file and execute it on the machine? Well, we've got all those options right here. Download this BIOS update and then execute a certain way. So theoretically, we have the capabilities of doing that. Just the question is, do we have the prepackaged content automatically? So I'll find out the answer on the prepackaged version of that content. Okay. Yeah. Great questions, everyone. So if we want to wrap it up here, Dave, I know you had a couple of follow-up items, right?
Yeah, and I just want to say, you did a great job. And
thank you.
I think we may have set the bar a little low at the beginning, talking about the migration being just a one-for-one match. You went into, you get a whole lot more.
Yeah.
And it's relatively affordable, and I'm not trying to avoid the question, but every situation is a little unique depending on where you are in your renewal cycle,
yep.
The exact bundle of products that you own today and where you're trying to get to after the migration.
Yeah.
But the important thing is, to every customer that we have quoted this to, no one's balked at the pricing.
Yeah.
It is relatively affordable, and we'll be happy to address your individual situations.
Yeah, it's just a small uptick from your renewal. Really, that's all that it is. It doesn't feel like, oh, I'm buying this brand new thing. It's just a little bit more than my renewal. Most customers fudge their renewals anyway and put 20-ish% on there, so it's not that much more than that, and pretty easy to do that.
We had a city winner.
Oh, we have a city winner. What city is it?
We got so the city is Baltimore.
Oh, Baltimore.
We've got customers from across the country who have joined this and are watching. The guy who won is about 15 minutes north of us.
Oh, well, is that cheating? I can't decide if that's cheating or if that's just good luck for us picking that city.
So it was Doug, and maybe we have to hand deliver the gift card to Doug. So it's a good guess, Doug. And,
yes, not a problem.
And no, we didn't give him the answer ahead of time. Biggest surprise ever. Lunch is here.
Hey, look at that!
So look
just
at
in
this.
time for us. What do we get? Jersey mics for me. It looks like.
Holy cow!
Great idea,
Larry.
Yes.
Well done. I'm going to wait. You're probably going to jump into yours because you can't. But we did want to offer a couple of things. One is free, and one maybe something you'd be interested in paying for. The first is we do something called an entitlement review, and what it is with the name changes that kind of Bryan went through earlier. There's a lot of confusion about what people own, what licensing and entitlements align to their specific product set. And so we've had a lot of success going through customers, just going through the entitlements, telling them what they own for the products that they've purchased. And without fail, we find something either that's being underutilized, customers had no idea that they owned, they're paying for a second product that duplicates the functionality. And that's an exercise that we're happy to do for free with you at any time. And what are some examples? Like a lot of customers, maybe they don't understand they own extraction for reporting. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we sit down, we review individually. There's plenty of times, again, like that, we had turnover. Well, I wasn't even here when we originally brought our Ivanti products. I didn't even know what we own. I love sitting down and getting more value of what you're spending. Or, I was just on the phone with a customer the other day, and there were several products that are like, well, what's that? We're paying huge amounts of money for it. Ivanti Voice.
We can do agentless patching for servers, and we own that.
Yeah, security controls. Oh, I didn't even know that was a possibility. So
we purchased Ivanti Neurons for service management, and we get Asset Manager with it.
Hey, look at that!
Well,
big surprise. So
what are we paying ServiceNow for?
Yeah, so let's sit down and let's review those entitlements. Again, there's no cost or anything. We're just examining what you're spending and trying to get more value out of that current spend. So just consider that an open offer to any of our customers that want to review that. Or if you're not even a customer of ours and you want us to dig into it and make sure that you're not overspending, that's something we can do with you.
Okay, and the last thing is, one thing a lot of our customers have historically taken advantage of is at the end of the year, especially if they're on fiscal year, budgets are tied to the calendar year. At the end of the year, we've got $10,000 and we're not sure what to spend it on. It's use it or lose it money. A lot of our customers, I said, about 25% or so, purchase a prepaid block of hours from us. And what's great is you can just have those hours banked. You don't have to, we can do it in whatever quantity meets whatever budget they have. It's relatively affordable. And the great thing is you don't have to go and ask for money every time maybe you need us to do a couple hours of work with you. Do some training when you hire a new person. Add one more service request. What are some other examples?
Yeah, just like you described there, help with upgrades if you still got on-premise stuff. We haven't done self-service before, we want to roll it out. Really, there's nothing we can't do. You want us to come on site and wash your car? Fine, and we'll do that as well. Anything is possible with this, and again, it's a lot easier to go to the well now, sometimes with end-of-year funds, and then we just bank it and use it for whatever you want in the future. So
and we get asked quite a bit, are you going to charge us every time we pick up the phone and call you? And that's not what this is designed for. You have a quick question you need an answer for, call your rep from NCSI. We'll find the appropriate resource. We'll get you answers. We're happy to spend a half hour on the phone with you or whatever it takes. But these are for longer engagements. A couple hours to do something along the line. These prepaid buckets work out fantastically. And for the end of the year, we're offering a little bit of a promotion.
Ooh, very nice. A Black Friday kind of a thing? Or past Black Friday? just between now and December 31st promotion is what it is?
Yeah, if you want to purchase one of these blocks before the end of the year, we will add on another 10% of hours.
Great.
Free of charge. So if you need 25 hours, obviously we'll just add another 2.5 hours onto it at no charge for you to use. If they're valid for up to a year from the date of purchase, and again, everyone who does it, they generally come back at the end of the next year and want to do it again.
Yeah, so, and you don't have to have anything in mind now. Again, it's just prepaid, and we'll figure out what to do with it next year. So good way to capture some of those end of year dollars.
All right, and I just have one more thing before I let you get to your sandwich. We did go into the Neurons platform here a little bit, and some of the things you can get with the migration. It's really just a first step towards that broader Ivanti platform. Will you spend just a minute on that before we leave? Yeah,
so a lot of customers that are potentially on the phone here today focus on endpoint management, right? That's what Endpoint Manager did. But that really is just one piece of the ecosystem. When you start looking at the Neurons platform as a whole, some of the great other components like our Neurons for ITSM and ITAM, so for service management, for asset management. Endpoint Manager I would never consider an asset management tool, because it's really just a discovery and inventory tool. It doesn't understand things like, well, what is the purchase order I used to buy this? What's the depreciated value? I see that Bob's logged into it. Is Bob supposed to be logging into it? Or did I assign it to a different division that Bob's not a member of? Those are the real tenets of asset management. So if you need to kind of take that next level of, hey, I need to know the purchasing information, that's usually kind of the canary in the coal mine, in my opinion, to see if you're ready to move on to that next step. Then you should be looking at that. Plus the whole myriad of other things in there, from Neurons for MDM to our discovery components, discovery with service mapping, risk-based vulnerability management. All of these are unlocked inside of this kind of ecosystem. Now, the Neurons migration bundle we're talking about doesn't necessarily unlock those different components, but you're going to start to see them play together nicely. I want to get an ITSM. I want to have a CMDB because we're doing change management. Well, how do you populate a CMDB if not discovery? We already know the great benefits of the Endpoint Manager and its discovery and how we talked about those other things like those connectors and so forth. Well, now we can populate the CMDB with that. So when you start bringing these tools together, you can get more value out of them.
Yeah, and as we've mentioned a couple of times, go to our YouTube channel. There are videos on all of this here, and we certainly are ready, willing, and able to have those one-on-one conversations whenever you're ready for it.
Absolutely.
All right, time to get to your lunch.
That's right.
We did good. We came in just under an hour.
Just in time. I like it. All right. I think I can finish this, the giant Jimmy John's in the next 4 minutes.
Way to stick to that pre-holiday diet.
Hey, well, what can I say?
This is large.
Remember, I have a combination health plan and retirement plan. I'm just going to die early, and so it's easy. If anyone had any problem with their lunch, please hit us up or even email us or put it in the chat. We can get you correct. We want to make sure you get fed for today's lunch and learn.
Thanks everyone for joining. I don't believe we have any more of these scheduled between now and the holidays. So everybody have a Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and we'll see you after the New Year if we don't talk sooner.
Okay. Thanks everyone.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.